Hi, if you're new here, my name is Keisha Courtney. I'm an advanced therapeutic yoga practitioner, death doula, and a yoga therapist in training. I live in Berkeley, California, and I've been practicing yoga for the past 15 years and teaching for 10. I've also been going through a spiritual awakening for the past 7 years. The journey of how I got here is really layered, but today I wanted to share my story with you. I think it's really important for you to know who I am, what I've been through, and where I'm going if you're going to practice with me in this virtual space. So I'm taking this moment to be vulnerable and open up to you so that you know who you're going to be practicing with. And I can't do that unless I start at the beginning. So here it goes. I am a first-generation Black immigrant who grew up in rural Utah. I was surrounded by Mormonism my whole life, and even though I was in no way, shape, or form religious. In fact, I was agnostic and closer to atheist before I had my spiritual awakening. For years, I used yoga solely as a way to cope with my high-stress, high-visibility job as a TV news reporter. But over the years, I've gotten so much deeper into this practice, and it's become a lifestyle. Not only has it allowed me to go more internally to heal decades of trauma, grief, and mind-body disconnection, but it's also been life-changing because I've met and have been able to be my most authentic self. I think it's important to note that I didn't get here just through yoga. I was very lucky and privileged to have a care team that helps me along the way. I have a mental health therapist, osteopaths, Reiki masters, massage therapists, and of course, a loving community. Healing my trauma has released decades of grief. And because I allowed my body to feel, I was able to make space. In fact, it's the best I've ever felt in my body, even at 41 years old. This journey has been excruciating, but it's also been the most magical experience of my life, as spiritual awakenings are. If you ever told me that my purpose would be to guide others on their own healing journeys as a holistic health practitioner, or even to be with them in their darkest, most difficult human emotions of grief, I would have given you a blank stare. But I now know purpose works in mysterious ways. For me, purpose is an intuitive knowing. It's moving towards something that lights you up and puts you into alignment, not only physically, but energetically, emotionally, and spiritually. When I hit those moments of alignment, it feels like I'm floating, and it feels like ecstasy. The problem is sustaining that feeling and the powerful connection to something outside of myself. It takes a lot of work, which is, again, a lifestyle practice. It isn't something that you arrive at one day and you just stay there. Just like the practice of yoga, you have to keep returning to it again and again and committing to it. Now, in order to tap into this power, it requires me to be really embodied and to feel everything. And I mean everything. It's those moments that left a mark on me as a child. It's the conversations I never had and will never get to have because those people have passed on. It's the pain from injury and repeated overuse of my body. And it's the repair conversations I was too afraid to have with the really important people in my life. But once I acknowledged these experiences, my body started to open up in ways I could have never imagined. I was a competitive athlete for a decade and a half combined. I started at the age of 3 years old. At 7, I started competing in not one sport, but 2. From ages 7 to 12, I competed in gymnastics and power tumbling. The ages of 13 to 18, power tumbling and cheerleading with a short stint in diving. And in my 30s, I was a competitive pole dancer. Because I used my body for so much movement and as a tool to succeed, I considered myself deeply embodied. But the truth is I wasn't. And I don't think most competitive athletes are. As an athlete, you have to constantly override what your body is telling you and use your mental fortitude to push past pain, injury, or stress. So for me, from a young age, achievement became my love language. I was always moving, I was always performing and competing. Sports and my ability to achieve became a huge part of my identity. I didn't compete in any sports in my 20s, but that decade was spent striving for professional achievement. I was a TV news reporter and a communications and marketing professional working in the field of education. There was a lot of success in my life, but there was also a lot of tragedy and a lot of death. You know those moments when you are with friends reminiscing about life, and then you tell them about an experience you had, and there is an awkward silence, and then you realize that your experience wasn't normal? Yeah, that's what happened to me. I was with two of my friends one day, and I mentioned how my high school in Utah, my graduating class, had about 15 people who died in it. From suicides, freak accidents, murders, and a lot of drug overdoses. I knew more than half of them personally, which I had a long history with, but others were just peers. Even though those relationships weren't deep, death finds a way of touching you regardless. On top of that, I had aunts and uncles die from diseases. I had two cousins who died from a seizure and a brain aneurysm. And as I mentioned, I was a TV news reporter. And the stories of the people I interviewed stayed with me. I interviewed families whose loved ones had been murdered. I reported on unimaginable violence. I listened and reported on stories involving both children and elderly people who had experienced horrific physical and sexual abuse. I stood in the aftermath of tragedy over and over again. Outside of my newsroom peers, I never talked to anyone about this. In fact, outside of therapy, this is my first time sharing it in this honest and vulnerable way. At that time when I was striving, I didn't realize that every story and experience was landing inside of my body with no way out. The grief compiled, and it just sat there. I became incredibly good at hiding and carrying things. I achieved great things in my career. I won an Emmy Award, a Golden Mike Award, and continued to excel with my education, receiving my master's degree in international relations and continuing to climb up the ladder of success. But as I continued to achieve, things in my body just weren't sitting well, and I felt so off. I now know that this was grief, and I carried the weight of this grief through romantic relationships, friendships, work, and building a business. At 34 years old, I quit my well-paying job in education and started building the Driven Yogi, a company I built to help diversify the yoga space and teach studio owners and yoga teachers about conscious and unconscious bias. Through this company, my team and I were able to train hundreds of yoga teachers in various areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we held specific trainings in these areas for Yoga Alliance. However, the financial stress, burden, and emotional toll was excruciating. On top of that, I had just broken up with a long-term partner who was my mirror soul, a twin flame. That relationship sparked my spiritual awakening and cracked me wide open. That relationship completely changed my life, as twin flames do. But that is a story for another video. It was that relationship that caused me to confront parts of myself I had spent years avoiding. The triggers, trauma, pain, and unhealthy ways I was engaging with the world and with myself. Now remember, this is the time I said I was agnostic, but I started having spiritual experiences that I could not explain away. I was having intense precognitive dreams, which means I would dream something and then it would happen in real life. I would have hundreds of synchronicities, which would appear in the most random ways, and I was being guided into the most amazing experiences that I had no explanation for. For example, I would think of a word in my head as I was walking, and someone would walk past me and say that same word. I would run into people from my life constantly in the most random ways, and these would be people I hadn't seen in years. I would see angel numbers that were bombarding me every day, and I would meet people at just the right time when I needed help in the particular way that only they could help me with. And on top of all of that, I was going more inward to learn more about myself. It was a magical time, and it was also a time my body said no more, and it started to unravel from what I was holding. Physically, my neck, back, and shoulders would go out, and the only thing I could do was lay there while the sensations passed, and sometimes that would take weeks. I would get hives for what I thought was no reason, and I was constantly getting an infection in my throat when nothing else in my life had changed. I would go to the doctor for these things, and they couldn't explain to me what was happening. I now know that my body was trying to tell me something, but I didn't have the knowledge to listen to it on that deep of a level just yet. Yoga became one of the most important tools in this process, and what ultimately helped me find relief from physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual pain. Going deeper into myself made me realize just how powerful our bodies are, and that we all have the answers we are so desperately looking for already inside of us. We just need to learn the tools and practices to be able to listen to our higher selves. Today, I don't share this story because I have all the answers. I share it because I know what it's like to carry pain for decades. I share because I know what it's like to carry that unprocessed grief. I know what it's like to discover what the body remembers that the mind tries to forget. I share because we are all living in our bodies and we're holding these stories and experiences that might be unprocessed and are preventing us from moving forward and living in our purpose. Healing doesn't happen by avoiding grief. It happens by addressing it, acknowledging it, and processing it. And I believe that holistic health and yoga therapy are the way to get there. If any part of this story resonates with you, I want you to know that you are not alone. Sometimes what feels like your life falling apart is actually the beginning of coming home to yourself. Now, this is just a small part of my story, and I plan to share more as I create these videos. But for now, I want to thank you for being here and for listening to my story, and I'll see you in the next one.